and get started with our next presentation. Thank you for sticking with us, and thank you for that amazing session that we talked about interviewing and the skills that you all need to make sure you do what's best for your interviews. I know I need to make sure I'm following Dr. Darko's recommendations and sitting up properly and getting my shoulders square and looking at the camera. Hopefully she approves of my lighting. All right. So I'm excited about this conversation because it's something that's near and dear to my heart, something that I think we need to have more conversations about. And when we were working with our colleagues from SHPEP, they asked that we specifically work into this presentation to make sure that we talked about imposter syndrome. We talked about real life perspectives and issues that have impacted us as healthcare professionals as we've gone through our career in how imposter syndrome is maybe hurt or help us. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next hour. One of the things that we're doing differently about this presentation compared to others is we're going to be using Poll Everywhere. So hopefully you all are familiar with Poll Everywhere. We're going to use this as a way to interact with you, read some of the comments from you all, join in the conversation. If you aren't participating, we'll use some of our own stories to help augment the presentation. But I really think that the best way to have this discussion is to engage you all in this space so we can hear about your perspectives and hear about some of the things that you all are dealing with and how that may be similar or different to some of the issues that we may have dealt with. So for this presentation, very straightforward. Define imposter syndrome, explain its impact on us and our professional development. And then most importantly, we want to make sure that we all walk away with tools or strategies to make sure we address imposter syndrome so that it does not impact us and be the barrier that it has been for many of us. So I'm going to start off by saying I'm an imposter. Now, I have a bunch of fancy titles that we can go over. I'm a dean at a medical school. I am the co-director of the Tour for Diversity in Medicine. I'm an assistant professor. I have won a lot of awards and gotten acknowledged for some of the work that I do, but that has not stopped me from feeling like an imposter. It's a visceral feeling. It's nagging and it's weighing. It keeps me up at night and makes me really uncomfortable, especially when I have to do things like give presentations like this, because I know that I'm going to be sharing information and my goal is to seem as if I'm an expert. My goal is to seem as if I'm confident and I have mastered the conversation that we're about to talk about. But I know that there may be somebody smarter in the audience than me, or someone who's more skilled at having this conversation than me, or someone who may be a better presenter than me. And when I give these presentations, whether it be here with the Tour for Diversity or some of the other spaces that I live and work, I may feel like, oh, I'm underperforming. And somebody's going to figure it out. And somebody's going to say, wow, he's really just faking it. We got to get him out of here. Now, I'm sure some of you have felt that. I'm sure you may feel that you may have felt that as you transitioned from high school to college, or when you participated in SHPEP, or when you did your first major presentation for your work, or when you started that first job that you had. You may have felt this way. And I want to just let you know that unfortunately these feelings are common, but we're here to talk about how we can overcome these feelings. And like I said, over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to really address what is imposter syndrome and how you all can overcome it. So I really would like for you all to engage with us. So we're going to pull up our first Poll Everywhere question. What is imposter syndrome? And I'm going to ask you all to use Poll Everywhere. So there's two ways that you can do it. Pull up your phones and you can text SHPEP T4D 645 to the number 2233. Or you can do it online at polleverywhere.com/SHPEP T4D 645. So we're going to give you all a couple minutes, and I'm not looking for the Merriam-Webster definition of what is imposter syndrome. I'm looking for your definition. What do you all think imposter syndrome is? And if you're having trouble pulling up answers, there we go, we got our first one. If you're having trouble with Poll Everywhere, you can also put it in the Q&A and we'll try and address those as well. but I see a couple answers starting to roll in. So it's definitely scary. You feel inadequate. You feel as if you don't deserve or you don't belong. Or maybe it's you feel like you haven't earned everything that you've received. You certainly don't belong. You have doubts about yourself. You feel inferior. This is great. So when I typically do this presentation and when we typically have this conversation, we're standing in front of a group of students and people are yelling at us this, and it's great to hear people from different parts of the room join in the conversation. And someone in the back of the room shouts out the feeling that you don't belong, or feeling overwhelmed, or feeling that you're underqualified. And that really helps to give us a sense that we're not alone in this. And we'd all, as we have these conversations around imposter syndrome, many of us are feeling this way. So I would typically ask who has imposter syndrome, and people would sit on their hands, and then eventually one brave person would raise up their hand. And by the time I gave it long enough, most people in the room would have their hand up. So as we talk about this, and thank you for your contributions. So imposter syndrome is feeling as if you're a fraud, a mistake, or you aren't where you're supposed to be, despite the credentials, your lived experiences, or realizing that you are a success. It's also called imposter phenomenon. You may hear it that way. And it was actually originally identified and defined back in the 1970s by two women researchers. And what they found was that these women, despite making significant advances or contributions to the workforce, to their research, receiving awards, really having high-ranking positions in whatever space that they were in, mostly in business, that they lacked to internalize their accomplishments, and they attributed their success more to luck, or that someone else was overconfident in them, but they actually hadn't achieved those accomplishments that were lauded upon them. Now, it's not a mental health disorder like depression or anxiety. However, it can lead to anxiety and to depression. And we're going to talk about its impact on us in our careers. Now, imposter syndrome was originally defined in the 1970s in successful women, but we found in various studies that imposter syndrome has been identified in physicians, medical students and trainees, researchers, and it's oftentimes in those who are coming from first-generation backgrounds, individuals who are Black, Latinx, or other individuals who identify themselves as underrepresented in medicine. And so it's really common for people to feel this way. And unfortunately, it has an impact on your career if you let it. Next slide. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Trevino, who's going to take our next question.
So thank you, guys. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm currently a pediatrics resident in Wisconsin, and actually, like some of you guys, I'm applying right now for my next stage for fellowship in pediatric emergency medicine. And so this is something that is deeply connected with me as I'm going through this interview process right now. So we got the next question up. We want you guys to start to share, when do you feel imposter syndrome the most? So we'll give you guys a minute to kind of start adding those pieces in, and we'll go from there. So I like some of the words that we're starting to see. We have phrases about, being praised and feeling uncomfortable with that, but also, thinking about what does it look like with our tests? What does it look like with our kind of activities and engagement through what we do? Another key word I really like that I just saw was vulnerability. And so, for me, I think about my journey with everything. And, I went through an MD PhD program. And one of the things that the literature has shown us that for a lot of the students who kind of go through that path, there's these pieces of transition times. So when we go from our preclinical years to going into the times that we start our research, and then when we go from our research back to clinical times, we get these feelings of not really knowing where we sit because of the training that we've had. And at times we actually undersell ourselves. And I think that's even true for all of us beyond just the MD PhDs in the group and those interested. We think about the times that are hard and that we struggle with what's going on, when the reality is, we have a lot of skills and experiences that really make us unique in terms of what we do and how we approach our clinical lives. And I think sometimes we undersell ourselves, and that's really the root of what we're talking about here tonight. You need to kind of know your story, your information, and you're going to really start to be able to put it together. And I think even as I've gone through these interview season for fellowship, I've reflected a lot on what residency interviews felt like for me 3 years ago. And I recognize that I'm in a very different place, not just because I've gotten a little bit extra training, but also because I know myself better. I know what I've done. I've embraced the story and the journey that I've taken through everything, and then found ways to actually connect it in a bigger picture. And I think when it comes to my interviews, that's been able to come out and really shine through, which is really great because, my first round with residency, I wasn't feeling very confident about what I was doing. Like Dr. Landry talked about, giving presentations and doing research and things like that. Yeah, I had those things, but to understand what it meant and the value that I brought, I don't think I fully appreciated. And so this is a really vicious cycle when we talk about imposter syndrome for yourselves, about not accepting the hard work you've done and really needing to figure out how to embrace all of those pieces that make you a unique applicant in what you're doing. So I want us to go to our next question. So we got this one up for you guys, and I believe it goes to Dr.
Hamid.
Hamid, yeah.
Hi, I'm Dr. Amira Hamid. I'm an emergency medicine physician in Chicago. So our next question is, what are the impacts of imposter syndrome? True. I see a lot of depression, low self-esteem, insecurity, self-doubt, anxiety, generalized unhappiness. Definitely agree with a lot of these. It definitely affects your confidence, social image. Totally agree. So we've heard a little bit about imposter syndrome, but in general, it's just like not feeling good enough despite your position in life. So on paper, it looks like you're completely qualified or even overqualified, but you internally feel that you aren't. So you foster these feelings of anxiety, self-doubt, which then lead to low confidence, low self-worth, and low self-esteem. And in return, you may go after fewer opportunities and have fewer opportunities for advancement within your field. You can also have anxiety, as a lot of you are noting. And with that anxiety, you can find yourself over preparing, constantly worrying, and constantly scared that someone's going to find you out. You may even do something opposite and have this fear of success. So instead of fear of failure, you have a fear of success, because if you succeed, then someone's going to request something further from you, and you may not do well that next time around. And then just having this back and forth pull you can develop depression or symptoms of depression. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So the cycle of imposter syndrome. So I can give you an example to kind of go along with this in my life. So I did an EMS fellowship in Denver, and I returned back to Cook County, where I serve as assistant medical director for EMS. But my EMS training also came with disaster training. So of course, I get back to Cook County and we're hit with the biggest disaster that hopefully we'll see in our entire lifetime. I don't want to ever do this ever again. But COVID was coming, and then it hit, and it just seemed like common sense. So I was like, yeah, I can definitely do that. I'll volunteer to be on the disaster planning committee, and I'll take a leadership role. But immediately after that, people were like, yeah, you had that disaster training, you can do it. And then I felt like a fraud. I was like, no, no one told me, walked me through step by step how to respond to this airborne disease. It sounds like it's going to wipe all of us out. But I started having all of this anxieties as I got assigned this upper left hand achievement related task. So I developed a lot of anxiety with that, self-doubt, worry, worried about the surge plan, what I was going to do with the waiting room, how were we going to flip our department, what's positive pressure, what's negative pressure, is everything that we understood about this disease true? And I ended up staying up all hours of the night, preparing and doing like this over preparation that you see down there. And that's because I felt like, I was a fraud in some degree. And I wanted to make sure that no one was going to ask me any question that I didn't know the answer to. Well, another way that you can respond to that, instead of over preparing, is to procrastinate. Basically, sit on your hands and wait to the very last minute, then do whatever you can to find out all the information you can to respond. And I've done that sometimes as well. But either way that you go with that, either procrastination or over preparedness, the end result is the same, that you get like this accolade for doing a great job, get a pat on the back, but you feel like you didn't deserve it. So if you procrastinate it, it's because the reason you got that pat on the back is because you got lucky. You didn't really deserve it. If you over prepared, it's because you did really hard work, but you still didn't deserve it. And some other thoughts are that you just didn't know that it was supposed to, obviously I took some notes here because I'm having a little imposter syndrome myself right now, doing a talk on imposter syndrome. They just don't know how it's supposed to look. So I felt like when I was going to give them my, disaster plans, they were like, yeah, these look great. But I'm like, but you don't know like what the national experts would say. That's because, you don't know that I'm over here just faking this whole jam. But that's basically the cycle of imposter syndrome. So I discounted the positive feedback, and then it makes me feel even more like a fraud. And then boom, I'm hit with another achievement related task because the other one I got my pat on my back. So that's how you end up in that cycle. And then I'll pass it on.
Well, before you do that, Dr. Hamid, one of the things that I would say is you're one of the over preparers, and I'm on the other side. I'm a procrastinator when my imposter syndrome kicks in. So case in point, I had to apply for a grant, and it was going to be really a transformative grant in my early part of my career. And so as I got the grant, as I got the notification for the grant, I read it and I was like, oh, this sounds like a great opportunity. Oh, I'll never get it. And so I sat on that grant and I sat on that grant and I sat on that grant, and I didn't work on it until the 11th hour of the last day to actually get the grant. And I was actually doing more self-sabotage than anything because I knew what I needed to do in order to get the grant done. I knew what wording I wanted to use. I knew who I wanted to partner with. I knew how I would shape out my question and how I'd find my answer. But because I waited so long, I had to rush to get that grant in. And I hit submit at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it was due by midnight. And I submitted the grant, and I was sitting back, and I had to wait 6 weeks before the grant came back. And that whole time, I just assumed that I wasn't going to get it. And then all of a sudden, I got the grant, and I was like, oh no, now what am I going to do? Because I wasn't actually expecting to get it because I had done all that self-sabotaging so that I wouldn't get the grant. And then I applied, and I guess I put the right words in the right categories in order to convince somebody that I might know what I'm talking about. And then they gave me the money that I needed for this project, and I felt an overwhelming sense of luck. I was like, whoo, I skated by there. They have no clue what they just did. And at some point, when they actually sent the check to my hospital and they started giving me funds in order to do the work, I started thinking, oh no, now I have to execute. What if they realized I didn't know exactly what I was talking about when I submitted that grant? And I just went through this whole cycle all over again when I had actually already accomplished what I needed to do. And so the whole time I was working on the grant, again, I was in that phase where I was procrastinating getting things done because I was so scared of failure, and I was so scared that somebody was going to find out, that if I would have just executed the way I knew I could and the way that they believed I could because I was successful in getting the grant, I would have been much happier. And the grant, although the grant went really well and the project was executed well and we were able to get some publications out of it, it would have been so much easier on myself if I would have just gone about it the right way and been proud of my accomplishments, but recognized that I needed to continue to do the hard work in order to make sure that the grant was executed the way I said it was going to be. And we would have been able to show the exact same results, if not better results, if I hadn't been so overcome with my imposter syndrome.
Thank you for that, Dr. Landry. You know, as well as you are, I am very much a procrastinator, probably for the same reasons. And so the question becomes, how do I overcome imposter syndrome? So I think we're doing another poll, correct? Yep. So how do you overcome imposter syndrome? Affirmations. Yep. That's a really good one. Yep. Let's see them roll in. Talking to others. Absolutely. Yep. Music. Okay. A support system. The music, I think, is really interesting. Prayer. Actually accomplishing things, right? The trust system. Therapy. Very good. Breathing. Excellent. Yeah. I mean, you know, overcoming imposter syndrome is possible, obviously, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean because you overcome it in one situation, you won't encounter it in another, right? It's a constant, right? As you know, as we talked about before, it's kind of like this cycle, right? So you do it, you kind of get over it, and then all of a sudden something happens and then you find yourself, you know, having imposter syndrome all over again. And so that can be, you know, that can be very frustrating to people at times. But it really is part of life. It really is part of, you know, the accomplished person's life. And so, you know, when you are called upon to do something, it is because someone actually does see something in you, that they feel like you actually are a very accomplished person, that you can actually do this. And so one of the things that I think is really important for you to think about when you're thinking about overcoming imposter syndrome is really understanding that, hold on a second, somebody else thinks I can actually do this, right? So if someone else thinks I can do it, why don't I think that I can do it myself, right? So, I mean, you'd have to be the master of deception to be able to trick that many people into thinking that you can do something that you actually cannot do. Okay. And I doubt that, you know, I doubt that many of you here have criminal minds. So, so if someone else thinks that you can do it, you probably can. Okay. So let's read some of these. Journaling, mentoring. Yeah. Mentorship. Yep. Criticism. Yeah. You know, sometimes, you know, people look at criticism as a negative thing, but it actually can be very positive, right? So you can have, you know, criticism in terms of positive feedback as well as negative feedback. So keep that in mind, that just because someone is giving you some sort of critique doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, it's a bad thing. Okay. It also can be places where you can, you know, improve upon what you're already doing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you can improve upon it, that you're not doing well in it. Workshops like this, for example, are a really good one. Audiobooks, practice. Okay. Practice is a big one. We talked about that on the MCAT webinar yesterday. If you practice and practice and practice, and all of a sudden you're starting to get those practice exams that have the score that you want, you're most likely going to get very close to that score, if not higher. Okay. So believing in yourself. I love the music. Absolutely love the music, because I think that that helps to kind of, you know, not just level you out, but I think that music, I was talking to my husband about this the other day, but I think that music oftentimes, you know, gets out our emotions, right? Like you have a song that you really, really can connect with. And so sometimes the words and songs really mean so much to us, and they can be very inspiring to us. So I love that. All right, next slide. So overcoming imposter syndrome. All right. So as I just said before, you know, I said to Dr. Landry that, yeah, I'm a very big procrastinator. So while he was telling his story, I was procrastinating and looking at this slide to see what I was going to tell y'all in the next 5 minutes. Okay. So here's Dr. Darko, the imposter, talking about overcoming imposter syndrome. Okay. Obviously, Dr. Landry, you know, picked me to do this particular slide because he thinks that I can do it. So if he thinks that I can do it, then most likely I can. All right. Now, first thing is you have to admit that you play a role in your own success. Okay, there's something that you are doing that is allowing you to have the success that you have. So again, that whole notion of if someone else thinks that you can do it, if someone else sees something in you, then you have to admit to yourself that you did something, you played a part in that, okay? So don't underestimate yourself. Definitely give yourself the credit that you deserve. You need to emphasize the importance of your own self-worth. You know, this is something that I talk about a lot. Okay. So, you know, differences do not equal being fake, right? Like just because you think one thing or you think another thing from someone else doesn't mean that, that you're being fake. Okay. Your background is what makes you unique. You know, if all of us came from the same walks of life, life would definitely not be very interesting. Okay. So you bring something to the table, and your experiences, your own life experiences definitely add value. It brings a different perspective to different situations. You know, we don't want drones in medicine. I don't want Dr. Landry to bring the same perspective, to medicine as I would, right? It would be very boring, number one. Number two, it could be potentially dangerous, right? Because then you get all tunnel vision and you don't see the things around you that you need to see, right? We don't want this group think. We really, really want people who come from all walks of life. And so many of you are just so diverse in so many different ways. And so you need to put value to that and understand that just because you are different, you might have an accent, you might, wear a certain type of clothing, you might have, certain type of hair, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is that you have some self-worth and you are valuable. And you should remember that and give yourself credit for that. Try not to compare yourself to others. I say this all the time, especially to the non-traditional students. Your journey, your pre-med journey is not someone else's journey. Don't sit there, oh, well, my friend, she went straight from college into med. Okay, whatever. She went from college to medical school. That was her journey. What does her journey have to do with you? It has nothing to do with you, okay? No one else's life is tied to yours, okay? Except for your family, maybe. But, no one else who's going through this process is tied to you. So try not to compare yourself to others. If you're going to do anything about looking at other people, learn from what they are doing, okay? But that's not necessarily a comparison. Just learn from what they're doing and see what you can apply to your life and what you can't apply to your life. But don't compare yourself to others to the point where you think you're doing something wrong because you have not taken the path that they have taken. Their life has no bearing on yours and vice versa. And also, know your limitations, but try to challenge yourself. Yesterday, we talked about the growth mindset, right? And just really trying to get out of your comfort zone. You need to know what your limitations are so that you absolutely know where to challenge yourself, okay? And realize that getting out of your comfort zone, that just means you're growing, okay? If you're doing something that's making you feel really uncomfortable, that's because you're growing. So go ahead and challenge yourself despite your limitations, and you'll get way farther than you ever thought you would. Extract the self-doubt before the situation occurs, okay? Don't sit there wallowing and thinking about, well, I can't, whatever. Sometimes actually it's better to just admit, you know what, I don't really know this that well, okay? And so it is okay, because one thing that I have learned about social media and just reality TV and things like that, right, is that people love to watch a process, right? People love to watch a process. They love to watch someone learning about things, okay? And so it's okay if you say like, hey, you know what? I really don't know this. I'm going to learn this. I'm going to take you on this journey with me of learning this. And sometimes people will appreciate that because they understand that life is just a process. It's a learning process. And then sometimes you just got to fake it till you make it. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes you just got to fake it until you make it. But that being said, right, like faking it until you make it doesn't necessarily mean, right, that I hand you a scalpel and, and then you start doing a C-section when you don't know how to do one. It means basically, again, kind of knowing your limitations, but then challenging yourself. Okay, so that's kind of the same spin, challenging yourself to go to the next level, obviously in a very safe way. But overcoming imposter syndrome is, is very possible. And I want you all to know that you can do that.
Hey, Tony, can you just go back one slide for me? So I wanted to ask Dr. Trevino and Dr. Hamid, of these, what techniques do you use to help yourself overcome imposter syndrome? Oh, Dr. Trevino, you're on mute still.
Oh, I was going to let Dr. Amir go because I saw her on click.
Oh, okay, I'll go. Yeah, I was just listening to you talk and I was like, yes, to this whole slide. The energy from this slide is life. Fake it till you make it. That is exactly what I'm doing right now. So actually, I'm a part of this gun violence. It's an American Foundation for Firearm Injury Reduction in Medicine, and I'm on their research council. And it sounds so fancy, but the way I got involved with it is that my friend died. She was the physician that was shot in Chicago for the Mercy Hospital shooting. So I was asked to join this foundation. That way I can help basically figure out what to do with all the money that was donated. But I didn't have any prior background with gun violence or anything like that. However, with a firm, they go around and they speak, and usually it's the two leaders, Chris Barsotti, Megan Randy. Anyway, I had invited Megan to come to speak at her hospital. And I said, hey, we're looking for someone to speak on gun violence. Do you want to come, or do you have any other recommendations? And she said, why aren't they asking you? Why don't you speak? And I was like, well, who am I? I'm just me. I'm not really, I'm not gun violence. I don't have you have a research fellowship, you guys have all these grants, you guys are the experts here. And she was like, you're the expert. She's like, don't you have perspective? Doesn't your perspective matter? Isn't your perspective different than everybody else's? And I was like, yes. And she was like, go ahead, you do the presentation. She was like, I recommend you do it. And I don't recommend them ask anybody else. And ever since then, I've just used that same energy, and I've just been giving, my talks here and there. But it's literally just like you said, it's not completely faking it, right? It's making sure that you're prepared when you go out there. So, I've done all the research. I looked at the CDC data, and now I'm giving this banging presentation on gun violence. So I feel like that's the one for me. It's the fake it till you make it for me.
I also think you took advantage and prepared yourself, and you challenged yourself beyond your limitations.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I shocked myself and surprised myself. And it's always, very rewarding to get, good feedback, because then, well, I guess in some instances you don't, and, from the cycle that we shared, and in some instances you don't really appreciate that good feedback, but, I'm appreciating it. And I'm like, well, I feel really good after doing that. I feel like I accomplished something. I feel like I didn't know something before. Now I know all this data, and I'm able to speak my truth and speak my life with this data wrapped around it to deliver, a presentation that moves people. So, that's me.
And what about you, Dr. Trevino?
Yeah, so, it's funny listening to both Dr. Landry and Dr. Volnadarko talking about how they dealt with procrastination when it came to applications, things like that, because that was, hit home for kind of how I looked at things when I was in the shoes of a lot of you guys who are listening to us right now, where I was pushing things off and then, feeling lucky that something happened. And so what kept happening for me, though, in those early stages was I kept letting myself get kind of paralyzed by the limitations that I thought were there with what was going on. And so the first thing that I had to do was really expand myself beyond what I thought I could do, and recognize that there was experiences and things that I've done in my life that really put me in that position to succeed. And so I think that was the first challenge. And then as I think of what I've been doing now in residency and moving into these fellowship interviews, it's really been a lot about that importance of my self-worth and recognizing that, I have a very unique path in what I've done, and I'm comfortable with that. And I also know that there are gaps in what I've done, which is why I'm looking at these next stages of training to really start to supplement and support what I want to do in the future. And so instead of saying, yeah, thanks, this has been great that I've done some things, you know, I can now go into that conversation and say, look, I know I've done things in this area like medical education, but I also know that I still have some gaps and some weaknesses that I'm really trying to fulfill during fellowship. You know, I want to look for programs that can support these needs so that I can have that career that I want in the future. And so, you know, it's really going to be important for you guys to start to understand who you are, what you want out of pieces. And then as you can start to find that value, you're going to be able to take that more confidently into these next stages, whether it's applications or interviews, or even just how you interact with people and mentors on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you for that. One thing I just want to add to this conversation is no one took that MCAT for you. No one took that DAT or that GRE or that PCAT exam for you. Unless, like Renee said, you have a criminal mind and you have figure out a way to cheat the test, which I'm not expecting any of you all to do. And the T for D is not encouraging you all to do any of that. I also want you all to recognize that the reason why your application is important and unique is because of who you are. And so we're going to talk about that in a second. And the last thing I want to say is, as Dr. Trevino was saying, you bring value to the situation. You bring value to, based off of your lived experiences. And I think the perspective that I have in my space, in the spaces that I operate at my institution, I'm able to do well and be successful in those spaces once I start to bring my authentic self to the room and not thinking that I need to fit in or be part of the status quo, like Dr. Valni Darko was saying. Be yourself. Recognize your uniqueness and how that adds perspective into this space. Next slide. So we used to do this in the tour where we would get up and have each other stand up and point at themselves and say, I have a story. You need to hear my story. And then we would challenge others to point at someone across the room or point at their neighbor and point at them and say, you have a story. We need to hear your story. And I want you all to stop and think about who's in medicine, who are participating in these programs, who are, why we are here. As you notice, the Tour for Diversity mentors are all individuals who are coming from Black or Latinx backgrounds. Many of us are first generation to go into careers in the health profession. Some of us are first generation in the US. Many of us are first generation to go to college. And oftentimes we were the only individuals in our circles from our high schools to move on and be successful in college and go on into a career in the health professions. Despite all of that, we traversed a large amount of obstacles. We were successful in the different ways as we accepted these challenges and moved past them. And our stories are important, but more importantly, we're here to make sure that we share our stories so that you all can see us, see a little bit of yourselves in us. And so that's why we're being so open and honest in these situations. And so I really encourage you to take advantage of these next 2 hours and ask questions, because we want to share our story so you can see a little bit more about us as humans and not just as the titles that go along with our names. And so that you can see yourselves in us as you progress. We want to encourage you, we want to cultivate you, and we definitely want to inspire you to pursue a career in the health professions. Next story. So we've heard whispers of this throughout the presentation. And I really think it's important for you to think about who is in your circle and who you allow in your life to be a sponsor, a mentor, and advisor to you. We talked earlier on day 1 and day 2 about advisors and how unfortunately some of those advisors can be gatekeepers as opposed to dream launchers. And so you want to make sure that you have the right people in your space who are advising you, supporting you, mentoring you as you pursue through this space. Now, sometimes that comes in the form of peer mentors. And I would recommend that everybody have their squad, their team, their group around them who are in similar spaces as you are, in trying to all accomplish a similar goal. And I think one of the things you see about the Tour for Diversity is we all have come together, and for many of us, we've known each other for years, and we've been supporting each other through our various phases, whether it's finishing medical school, getting through residency, doing fellowships, starting off in our early careers and building our jobs and building our lives outside of medicine. And so we've been here to support each other along the way. I'm not going to say how long I've known Dr. Valney Darko, but it was before we both had kids, and she knew me when I still had hair. So it's been a really, really long time, right? So it's really important to have the peers that are around you to be supportive of you. It's important to have the right group around you. It's important to have multiple mentors. And it's also important to have mentors who are at various stages. It's not always, you don't always need the person who is the oldest person in the room with the most senior title, or those individuals with gray hair or no hair at all to be your mentors. That doesn't mean they're going to do a good job at it. And for me, I have mentors who are a step or two ahead of me in my career. I'm an assistant professor, they're associate professors. When I was in residency, I had mentors who were a year or two ahead of me in residency, or they were junior faculty. So all of those people were able to offer a different perspective, but they got to know me, they got to know what I was interested in, and they got to offer me, they offered me advice from a place that was really tangent to the process that I was going through. So as I say all of this, I want you to also recognize that your mentors don't all have to be in the same field as you. And many of us have mentors who are outside of medicine, whether it's business or law, or they're individuals that we met along the way through our church or through our or other social organizations that we may be a part of. And those individuals have the ability to sow in our lives just as much as individuals who are in our chosen profession. So as you think about the people who you surround yourself with, it's okay to have mentors of various ages and stages. And it's also okay to have mentors in various aspects of their various careers, because all of these people can know you and give you advice from different vantage points. Dr. Valney, you want to talk about your sphere of mentors and how many people you have supporting you?
Oh, absolutely. So right now I can think of 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 people that I have mentoring me right now. 3 of them happen to be in OBGYN, but that I don't necessarily go to them for OBGYN related mentorship, right? I just happen to meet them because I was a resident in their program. The other mentor that I have is actually, he's not even a practicing physician. You guys, know him, Dr. Sanders. I met him actually when I was pre-med. So he's been mentoring me for, over 20 years now. And he and I definitely don't necessarily talk about, medicine related things, right? We talk about so many other things in our lives. And then my other mentor, we just kind of talk about just life, right? So it's funny that most of my mentors, or probably all of them at this point, aren't necessarily OBGYN related in terms of the information that I gather from them, the value that I get from them. And so for me, it's just really important to have people to bounce things off of, right? It really helps to kind of ground me. Like if I'm having a problem, or if if I have an idea, if I have an issue, that I have different people that I can go to, because they all come from different walks of life and they all see things very differently. They have many different perspectives. And what I'm finding also is that some of my mentees have also kind of become mentors in their own right for me, right? Because I've mentored them and they've gotten to a certain point in their careers. And now if I have a question, I go to someone who I once mentored and I say, hey, you know what? This is what's going on. Let me bounce this off you. Or, here's an idea that I had. What do you think about it? And so, it's like the student has become the teacher, it's like it becomes this almost symbiotic relationship. And it's been very surprising to me that relationship, has now kind of developed, because that's not something that I necessarily expected. And I find myself doing that even for some of my mentors. I had a mentor call me the other day and she's like, listen, I have this legislation that I'm trying to push forth in the state. And, I want you to look over this stuff. And I'm like, who, me? Like, you were mentoring me. Like, now she's coming to me to basically help her with something. And so, mentoring is a very interesting relationship. And what I will say about mentoring is that it is a two-way street, but it is definitely your responsibility, especially at this point in your careers to help to establish that relationship, right? One of the things that I definitely found that I did with all of those mentors that I just mentioned to you is that I kept in contact with them. I made it my responsibility. It was on me. The onus was on me. I wasn't worried about, well, Dr. Brugge didn't call me back. I just called her again, and until she spoke with me. And then finally, when your mentors realize that you are invested in yourself, then they will be invested in you, because they can't be invested in you more than you're invested in yourself. So if you are looking for mentoring, definitely take the initiative and contact that mentor. If you have to set up something with them every single month and say, hey, listen, I just want to shoot the breeze with you every single month, you would be surprised at how that relationship develops and to what degree that relationship will develop over time.
And Dr. Hamid, can you share your story about how you've cultivated some relationship with mentors? And and there's a question from the audience. When seeking a mentor, do you just ask them to be your mentor, or how do you develop that type of relationship?
Yeah. So anytime I've had a mentor, I've just kind of, if I directly wanted mentorship from them, and I didn't just want to develop any type of, friendship relationship with them, then I've just come out and said, hey, would you mind being a mentor to me? I really appreciate, how you do this or that. And I'd like to learn how to do that. And that's, people have been very receptive to that. I've gotten some pretty good relationships started that way. So I definitely recommend just asking directly. But just as Renee was saying, sometimes you just end up really hitting it off with some people, and the people that you are mentoring become your mentors, and people that are friends of yours become mentors to you. So I have a couple of my mentors I have in different aspects of my life. For EMS, I have three mentors that are still out in Denver, and they're great. They invested a ton into me while I was a fellow there, and they always frequently reach back out, and I, circle back and reach back out with them. So we have like a ping pong relationship going, and anytime I have a question about anything, they're always readily available. When COVID hit and I was like, hey, how's Denver handling, COVID with your pre-hospital transports? Immediately, they're setting up meetings to talk to me on the phone and things like that. So excellent mentors for advancement there. And then I also have my two mentors here, medical directors for the Chicagoland area. And then a friend of mine, his name's Garth, and we graduated actually. He was a med student the same time I was med student. We graduated together. We both went into emergency medicine. I went into academic medicine. He went into community medicine. But he's been doing a ton of social justice initiatives. He's also been involved with a lot of programs that foster improvement and advancement and leadership initiatives and leadership capabilities. So I've really just been reaching out to him a ton saying, man, how'd you get involved with that? And how can I get involved with that? And can you kind of guide me through some of those steps? And he's been putting me into contact with certain people, and also basically just putting me on as far as different opportunities that are available. And that's somebody that's a friend of mine. And then lastly, I have a coworker at work who does a ton of work with diversity and inclusion. And I think that her drive and her stamina, I just feed off of her, and sometimes she feeds off of me. And we just know that we're both here for this, we're both here for the long run, and we're both here trying to advance opportunities for people of color. So we both basically feed off each other. And then lastly, I had a mentor. She just left and went across the street to the University of Illinois at Chicago, but she was Cook County faculty, but she's my mentor for anything academic, as far as someone that's been in the game for a while. So those are all my mentorship relationships.
You have an amazing cohort of mentors that are going to really support you going further. Dr. Trevino, how have you cultivated relationships with your mentors? And maybe we can answer that briefly before we wrap up this session.
Yeah, it was funny listening to a couple of the stories. I had one really big one that kind of stood out to me as I thought about cultivating mentorship, and it actually involved the tour. I remember the first time I met the first time I heard about the tour, I was sitting at SNMA, and it was just after the first tour, and thought, that sounds like a pretty cool thing. it lines up with the work that I had been doing in Chicago. It lined up with what I thought I liked doing. And I remember I reached out and really had no expectation of, talking with Dr. Matthews. And she was in Chicago at the time, and we met up. And I remember walking out of that lunch thinking, wow, this sounds great, but I don't know if this is going to happen. And I remember having the phone interview with Dr. Landry, and you can't see the other person, so it's hard to read where things are going. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, like, I've heard what they've done, I've heard how they're approaching this, and while it's unique, my head, I was struck with imposter syndrome, even thinking about joining the tour and what it meant. And I remember meeting up with the group once I was in, and we're getting prepared for my first tour. And you see the connections that people had, because a lot of the mentors, like Dr. Landry had already mentioned, they've known each other for years. And so you come into this group of people who've been around each other, and you are just kind of awestruck a little bit about what's going on and how they've connected with each other and how they've moved things forward. And, in my shoes, I've been on a lot of tours. I probably hold the record for the most tours by a medical student, because I joined as an MD PhD student. And over the years, these relationships have gone from, thinking, okay, maybe I shouldn't be here, to recognizing the role that I can play in the tour, thinking about the mentors who are here within the group. And then also, I think a piece that I think everyone's hit on, but I really want to emphasize for you guys, is that you have your peer mentors as well. There are going to be people who are coming up through training with you at the same stage that you're going to have those maybe friend relationships with, but don't write them off as not being mentors and valued people in your circle, because there is something to be said for that. Because once people start going on their different paths, you're going to have a different set of experiences to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. And so I think that peer relationship, that peer mentorship, is just as important. And so when you're thinking about your circle, yeah, you're going to be looking for people who are a couple steps ahead of you and maybe someone who's one step ahead, but also be thinking about those people who are kind of in the trenches with you right now, where you're at and how those relationships look. Because like you've heard from all of us, these things evolve and they change over time. And sometimes mentors will you'll have them phase out of your world, and sometimes they'll phase from a mentor to maybe more of a friend and colleague. And those are going to be natural relationships that happen. It's a matter for you to recognize what you need at that time, and that's really what's going to be the driving force that really helps push these things forward. So I just want you guys to be open to that understanding that your circle is going to grow and shrink, and it's going to do these crazy changes over time, but it's going to be all based around what you think you need for your own personal development.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Trevino. Tony, can you go to the next slide? So I just want to end with some the place where we all find our inspiration, which is the Twitter, with two amazing quotes. The fear of failure will sometimes have you masking your procrastination as planning. And I think that's Dr. Volney Darko and I, this one speaks to us. Our fear of failure and our imposter syndrome has us masking procrastination as planning. And the next one. Some of us will have imposter syndrome over stuff, but will confidently put proficient in Excel on your resume. And I think it's really important for us to process this one a little bit. There are things that we are good at, there are things that we aren't. I can tell you that Excel is a whole different monster. If you actually try to do some statistical analysis with it, you can see how weak you actually are in it. But you're actually really good at a lot of other stuff, but we don't give ourselves credit for what we're actually good at. So take those with a grain of salt, think about those, and be sure to process those as we go forward. Next slide, Tony. And I think this is a great place to see maybe if there's any questions from the audience. I think the imposter syndrome discussion and the importance of mentorship can't be stressed enough. I think you all will need to maybe digest this presentation a little bit, because we gave some tips and it may have hit a little close to home for some of us, but it is often a barrier for our success when we don't actually try and pursue our dreams. And